You are going to hear about 5 of the most terrifying experiences ever documented on the open ocean tonight. Every story you hear has been meticulously cross-checked from actual testimonials, forums, and Reddit posts where survivors vowed never to discuss them again. These aren't ghost stories told over a campfire. Imagine being on a luxurious cruise with the sound of strangers laughing, resonating through gleaming hallways, when all of a sudden you realize that you are not alone and that the person following you was never meant to be on board. Greetings from Midnight Outcry. To ensure you never miss a terrifying night, turn down the lights, make sure you're by yourself, and, if you haven't already, hit the bell button and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to leave your own opinions in the comments section below. It might be your tale next. Story 1. Why are you sitting in my cabin? My eyes were still gooey from sleep when I woke up, and that was the first sound I heard. A man with a chilly, flat voice stood at the foot of my bed, looking as pale as paper. He was dressed in an outdated suit with a crooked tie that looked like it belonged in a black and white photograph from the 1940s. I sat up so quickly that I almost bumped my head against the bunk. But he was gone when I blinked. There was nobody in the cabin. It was time for me to get off the ship. You can call me Eric Donovan. I'm 34 years old from Pittsburgh, but I currently reside in Chicago. I work in IT for a mid-sized logistics company. It's not a glamorous job. All I do is code, patch servers, and stay up late. Due of my severe burnout from the previous quarter, my co-workers pooled their money for this cruise. They advised me to rest, get some sun, and perhaps meet someone. In all honesty, I didn't want to go. Both crowds and water have never appealed to me. However, I went because I didn't want to acknowledge how dire things had become. I was already regretting it 3 nights into a 7-day journey. A stranger in my cabin now? No. It must be a dream, I convinced myself. I checked the door anyway. From the inside, locked. I had left my cabin keycard on the desk. Except for the constant hum of the ship's engines beneath everything. That faint vibration you don't notice until you really listen. The hall outside was deserted. I made the decision not to bring it up. I would ignore it and try to have a good day. However, that would be my final typical morning. The main dining hall was full. Children were rushing between tables, and servers were juggling trays during breakfast. The air was heavy with the scent of syrup and bacon. I found a corner, picked up a plate, and made an effort to act as though I wasn't surrounded by 800 strangers. I turned halfway through when I heard someone mumble, "Don't sit here." The same individual. He was standing just behind my chair, his suit as wet as if he had just stepped out of the sea. My fork clattered to the floor as I leaped to my feet. But there was no one there when I looked again. The pair at the table next to me looked at me as if I had gone crazy. I ignored it, said something about a spill, and didn't touch my dinner. I didn't notice anything strange till I was leaving. A young woman in a neat white uniform was observing me. She seemed more interested in seeing what I would do next than she was worried. I couldn't get rid of it for the remainder of that day. I felt I saw him everywhere I went, including the theater, the pool deck, and even the stores. Standing too motionless in the midst of the bustling mob, just out of sight. I determined I needed answers by the evening. I then proceeded to the front desk. The young lady who had been observing me previously was present. Maria was written on her name tag. I said to her in a whisper, "I believe someone has been in my cabin." A man. Pale, tall, vintage suit. How he got in, I don't know, but... Her smile wavered. Leaning closer, she glanced over her shoulder. "Have you previously seen him?" she muttered. I went cold. "You know who I'm referring to?" Maria quickly glanced up at the surveillance camera. "Of course, sir. We'll have housekeeping double-check for you," she remarked loudly as she passed a folded piece of paper across the desk. Confused, I pocketed it and left before anybody could notice. I unfolded the paper in my cabin later. It wasn't a letter. The picture was in black and white. On the same deck where I had been walking earlier, a group of passengers stood, posing for the camera, beaming. But the man was there, in the center. The same crooked tie. The same vacuous look. June 12, 1947 was the date on the picture. That was when I first became aware that there was a serious problem with this voyage. Furthermore, it was much too late to get off. I had a hard time falling asleep that night. The picture of the man's pale face looking up from 70 years ago was resting on my desk. I attempted to turn my head away, but my gaze kept going back. The photo's edges were fragile and twisted with age. As if it had been sealed up for decades, it had a slight mildew odor. How could Maria have it prepared, folded, and waiting for me? I kept asking myself. The ship was silent around 2 in the morning. Even the waves seemed to hush in that profound silence that only occurs on the ocean. I was determined to sleep, so I pushed myself into bed at last. However, the knock was nearly instantaneous. My cabin door was rapped softly 3 times. I went cold. At that hour, nobody should be knocking. I remained motionless, didn't take a breath. 3 more knocks followed, this time louder. Heart pounding, I pulled the covers up like a kid. That was it. The murmur, muffled but distinct, came through the door just as I was sure I wouldn't answer. When the silence was so long, it felt secure again. My name. Leaping to my feet, I picked up the phone off the nightstand and called reception. Before a weary male voice responded, it rang again. I muttered, "There's someone outside my door. This is guest services. My name is being said. Now I need protection down here." Quiet. Then, in the same bland voice, "That corridor is empty, sir. Kindly go back to sleep." Click. The line died. After that, I didn't sleep for a second. I looked like I had crawled out of a grave when I staggered into the breakfast hall the following morning. My hands are shaking from drinking too much coffee, and I have dark bags under my eyes. Once more, Maria was behind the counter. She gave me a quick glance while maintaining a carefully neutral demeanor for onlookers. However, she leaned in a little when I moved my plate across. "Avoid discussing him in public," she muttered. "They'll claim you're insane. Or worse." I started to counter, but she shook her head, her eyes piercing. Then, as if it were a packet of sugar, she dropped a tiny envelope beneath my tray. With my heart pounding, I carried it back to my table. The words, "He comes to those who notice. Stop noticing," were scrawled in a hasty handwriting on a single slip of paper that I stared at until the letters became blurry. "Give up observing?" The man kept popping up inside my cabin. How was I to ignore him? That's when I saw him once again, standing still in his crooked tie against the wall at the far end of the hall. No food, don't drink, simply observing. He vanished as soon as I blinked. However, the chair he had been standing next to was still damp, as if it had been soaked by seawater. I attempted to test it later that day. I made myself not to search for him as I made my way along the upper deck. I continued to focus on the horizon, the glistening blue, and the sea's never-ending roll. However, I was deceived by every reflecting surface, even the polished brass trim and glass railings. In each, his face came over my shoulder, pallid and fuzzy. I was unable to stop observing, and he seemed more genuine the more I observed him. I wasn't the only one by sunset. Near the pool, I heard a couple fighting. "He was in our room," the woman whispered, pale and shaking, simply standing there. The man dismissed her, telling her that she was having hallucinations. She wasn't, though, based on the expression in her eyes. I made another attempt to contact reception that evening. This time, the voice was different. Female, steady, and almost too serene. "That type of passenger is not on board," she stated. "Please don't distribute false information." "Enjoy your evening," she said courteously, but I heard a warning beneath them. Then, for the smallest moment before hanging up, her voice changed, as if she were saying, "He's already chosen," to someone else in the room. Click. The line died. I knew then that this wasn't just me. Something that shouldn't have been on this ship was. And it was already aware that I was observing it. The ship no longer felt like a holiday liner on the third night. It had the feel of a trap. The same mechanical vibration pulsed along every corridor, but it sounded louder now, as if the entire ship were straining against something invisible. I was unable to determine whether the ship was warping beneath my feet or if it was just paranoia. I stayed as far away from my cabin as possible. I pretended to watch the credits of a family-friendly comedy that none in the crowd was even laughing at, while I stayed in the theater after the late show. Slowly, they filed out, all grins and plans for sunscreen, talking about tomorrow's island stop. But I saw him when the lights came up. Sitting alone in the very back row was the man with the twisted tie. I swear to God that I saw him get up and make his way down the aisle. Every step he took left damp footprints on the carpet. It was not noticed by the crew. It went unnoticed. Just me. I also saw that his reflection was missing from the glass as he passed the exit door. I went up to Maria once more, cornered her where no one else was, next to the staff stairs. I insisted that you tell me what was going on. Who is he? I keep seeing him, but why? Her eyes were downcast as she fumbled with her keys, her hands shaking. I should not speak with you, she muttered. You have already been marked by him. He gets stronger the more you talk about him. So how can I stop it? I growled. At last, Maria raised her head, and I felt cold at the expression in her eyes. Don't be afraid. Not sympathy. Resignation. You don't, she remarked. You live long enough to get off the ship. Before I could continue, another crew member came around the corner. If he lets you. Maria suddenly straightened up, her face going expressionless and businesslike as if we hadn't spoken. She gave me a courteous nod and turned to leave me feeling nauseous. Things became more heated that evening. The sound of trickling water awakened me up. Go slowly and steadily. I initially believed it to be the bathroom faucet. However, the air had a strong fragrance, more akin to ocean brine than tap water. I instantly sensed it when I swung my feet off the bed. The carpet was wet. I felt a surge of fear. I turned on the flashlight, picked up my phone, and looked around the room. Pools of salt water formed in the cabin's corners. My bags were partially immersed. And there stood the man, half in shadow, in the far corner. The suit is soaking. Pale skin. He stared at me with lifeless eyes. Leave, I yelled and grabbed the desk lamp as if it may help. Panic raw in my throat, my voice cracked. Once, the light flickered, and he was gone when it calmed down. The water was all that was left, gently slapping at my ankles. The carpet was completely dried by morning. Until the announcement, I believed I could be going crazy. The captain's voice boomed calmly over the PA. Attention passengers. Tonight's port stop will be delayed due to unforeseen weather. Stay on board, please. All facilities are still accessible. However, when I looked at my phone, the forecast for the next 3 days showed only clear skies. It wasn't only me who noticed. People in the dining hall complained. I heard murmurs. Why won't they let us to dock? Have you heard anything about the missing woman? Absent? The couple lowered their voices as I pressed closer, obviously hesitant to speak further. Later, a man my age stopped me as I was walking around the almost deserted lounge. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, nervous. I take it, you've seen him, he muttered the question. I felt sick to my stomach. What are you discussing? The one in the old suit. His terrified gaze darted all over. I can tell, so don't lie. I was discovered by him 2 nights ago. He's everywhere now. In the mirrors. Within the glass. He took hold of my arm with chilly fingers and said, I don't even look anymore. Avoid noticing him. He wins that way. Just don't. He jerked away before I could reply, vanishing into the crowd as if he had never said a word. But even after he was gone, his words continued to echo in my mind. Keep your eyes off him. However, it was too late. I took note. I was also aware that he wasn't done with me. I was broken by the 4th night. I was no longer able to feign. I couldn't persuade me that this was a cheap cruise ship plumbing trick, stress, or hallucinations. For now, other travelers were vanishing. It began with the elderly dining hall couple. Every morning at breakfast, they sat by the window, and argued about getting more coffee. They had no one at their table by the 5th morning. I inquired about their whereabouts from the waiter. He smiled blankly. When I pressed, his face froze, almost robotically, but he said, "We don't have records of every guest's habits, sir." At last, he stated, "They disembarked." My blood froze. How? He didn't respond. We never docked, simply left. The ship's corridors appeared disorganized by the afternoon. The atrium, lounge, and pool deck were the same route I had taken 100 times, but now the doors were different. Entire hallways were bent at unnatural angles. I swear that, as if the ship were collapsing in on itself, I passed the same family 3 different times while traveling in various directions, and I sensed him everywhere, reflected in panels of glass. A figure in the elevator doors behind me. When I rounded corners in the hallway, I could hear the little squelch of damp shoes. I made an effort to ignore it. I recalled the admonition from that man. However, how could I have failed to notice the pale figure standing directly behind me in the mirrored reflection, pouring down the carpet, when the elevator doors closed? I let out a yell. The doors were opened. There was no one. Maria passed me in the hallway that evening and gave me a folded piece of paper. A crumpled paper thrust into my palm, no words, no look. Alone in my cabin, my hands trembling, I opened it. "Some of us serve him now. Some of us hide. Don't go below deck 4. Don't speak to the water. And if he follows you into your dreams, don't wake up." The paper was soaked through at the edges, as though it had been dipped in seawater. I didn't get much sleep. It wasn't rest when I eventually fell asleep. In my dream, I saw the ballroom full with travelers wearing vintage attire, waltzing to shattered music. With each twist of the dance, salt water crept higher and sloshed over their ankles. And he stood in the middle of the floor, the man wearing the suit. His smile was too big, and his tie was crooked. He held up a glass toward me, and even though the music muffled everything, I swear I heard the words, "Welcome back." I woke up with a gasp, with sheets soaked, but not with perspiration, with seawater. The weight of it caused the mattress to sag. I tried to take a picture, but my phone flickered and died. I took off running, down the passage, out of the cabin. I saw passengers go by like shadows, their features hazy, their voices mangled like static. Under my feet, the ship trembled, as if it were straining against the sea. I staggered onto the deck of the pool. I briefly believed that I had gotten away. The pool, however, was dark, not bluish, dark. The air was quiet, but the sea swirled wildly. The waves smashed violently against the sides, as though the ocean itself had risen through the pool, but there was no wind or storm. Then I caught sight of him. He was standing on the far side, his suit glued to his body, his shoes soaking. Pale hands lifted as if to call me nearer. Ignorant. The other passengers moved in silence around me. The kiddie pool was filled with splashing children. One of the men drank a cocktail. The terror before me was met with no response. With a pounding heart, I retreated. However, he was behind me when I turned. This time, closer. I was so close that my face was splattered with salty drips. I ran. I'm currently writing this in the ship's library, in a dim nook. I'm not sure how long I have left before he discovers me once more. He is seen in every reflection. All surfaces tremble like the sea. The walls are also beginning to leak. Avoid taking cruises if you're hearing this. The water is not reliable. Additionally, avoid looking for him at all costs, because he notices you once you do. There was silence at the start of the last night. Not tranquility, not serene. The quiet that falls in a room when the yelling stops. I have no idea what time I left the library. The clocks had ceased, all of them. Each of the bronze clocks in the hallway I passed was frozen at 3:07. People passed past, as if they were sleepwalking. There was no echo of their footsteps. Their voices seemed like garbled static rather than actual words. I made an attempt at conversation, taking a young man by the arm and inquiring about the captain's whereabouts. He smiled slowly and waterily at me. His eyes were unfocused and pallid. Additionally, a stream of seawater trickled down his chin when he opened his mouth. I released him. I took off running. All I could think about was finding the bridge, to get in touch with someone, anyone, who could halt it or explain this. However, my stomach fell when I pried open the command deck door. With his hat lowered, the captain took a seat at the wheel. At their places, officers stood. Every stance is flawless, every uniform is crisp. They weren't breathing, though. Their skin was stretched tautly across bone, bloated and gray. The floor was soaked by seawater that trickled down their collars. As if guided by unseen hands, the wheel groaned as it rotated itself. Additionally, there was nothing in the middle where the captain's face ought to have been. All that was seen was a whirlpool-like haze of flowing water. I almost slipped on the damp floor as I staggered backward. I heard his voice at that moment, low, patient, and drenched with the ocean's weight. "You returned." I whirled, my heart hammering my ribs. He was present, the traveler, the man wearing the suit. He stood with his hair slicked down and his sneakers creating puddles. This time, though, I observed something that I had never noticed before. His name tag, crookedly fastened to his lapel. The name from Maria's note is D. Crowley, the person who previously drowned here. "Why me?" I muttered. His grin got bigger. "Because you observe, the others don't. The others continue to dance." I retreated till my shoulders struck the door. He only cocked his head, saying, "I'm not involved in this. You are already." Then he disappeared, not gone, not vaporized. Simply absorbed, like water seeping into fabric, it melted into the weeping walls. With my chest heaving and my shoes squeaking on the damp floor, I stumbled out. Outside, the corridor narrowed like a tunnel's neck, twisting and bending. And I was horrified to see where it was going. Down. Beneath deck 4, Maria's note warning me not to go there. Walking is not something I recall. All I can recall is going down. My hands slid across rusty railings that were slippery with seawater as the stairs continued to get closer and tighter. The air was chilly and wet by the time I got to the bottom. My breath left me in a fog. The hallway was ankle-deep in water. Overhead, lights flickered, and there was a door at the far end that I shouldn't have opened. However, I did. Half submerged, the cargo hold yawned in front of me, its walls moaning as if the water itself were pressing in from the outside. Floating in the dark water were dozens of passengers, their tongues moving in silent sentences, their eyes open but blind. Their bodies, which had no business being inside a ship, rose and sank with the tide, and he was in the middle, tied to nothing. D. Crowley, the traveler who drowned. Like a reflection caught in waves, his physique alternated between man and water. As though he were welcoming me home, his arms were outstretched. The water rushed up until it reached my knees and then my waist. The walls shook, as if it were alive, and dying. The ship itself groaned. The roar of the tide drowned out my attempt to shout. He muttered something. I sensed it, even if I couldn't hear it. It throbbed like a heartbeat inside my skull and chest. And everything turned black when the waves slammed over my head. In my cabin, I awoke. Dry, tucked in sheets, the bag is packed, as if nothing had occurred. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be docking shortly. We hope you enjoyed your voyage with us, the morning announcement chirped merrily. However, as I looked at the mirror over the sink, water began to flow down the glass, and Dee was standing right behind me, reflected in the wet surface. Crowley grinned. "Tell me, will I actually depart when I get off this ship, or have years passed since I drowned here and no one ever noticed?" Story 2, she said, "Don't tell anyone you saw me," before disappearing into the mob. Eric Malone is my name. I'm a 34-year-old Cleveland, Ohio electrician. I eventually treated myself to a week-long Caribbean cruise last spring after working 12-hour shifts during an ice storm season. My sister urged, even though I wasn't exactly the cruise type, I get seasick easily and prefer to spend my weekends doing things around the house. "You've been living like a hermit, Eric. Go live a little," she encouraged, and I did. I knew what she meant as soon as I got on board. The stench of salt and chlorine filled the air. From concealed speakers, music was pumped. With its dazzling corridors, golden elevators, and endless buffets, the ship seemed less like a ship and more like a floating metropolis. It was then that I saw her. There was a girl, around 12, standing close to the check-in counter. Her garment was dry, but her wet black hair hung over her face like she had just gotten out of the pool. Her eyes, unusually keen for a child of that age, were fixed on me. She then murmured, "Don't tell anyone you saw me." She vanished into the passenger flow after slipping behind a family that was lugging their bags. At first, I dismissed it. Long drives, jet lag, and a hyperactive imagination. That sentence, however, remained in my mind like a splinter. Ribeye, an unending dessert, and a chilled beer should have been the ideal dinner that evening. But I was distracted. I always thought she would be at the dining hall entrance when I looked toward it. When I returned to my cabin, I told myself to quit acting strange. She was probably just a guest kid playing around. However, she wasn't included in the welcome directory on the TV when I was looking through the passenger manifests. Once more I scrolled. And once more. More than 2,000 names. Partners, families, and children. Nobody under the age of 12 is going alone. If I had learned her last name at all, it was very different from mine. My stomach went queasy for the first time, and it had nothing to do with seasickness. I saw her again the following morning. I noticed her reflected in a porthole as I was crossing Deck 7 to the outdoor pool. Her reflection, not her. With her head tilted and her lips moving as if she were humming, she was walking parallel to me. There was nobody around when I spun. I put my fingers up to the glass of the porthole, wet and cold. I was staring when a crewman walked by. "Are you okay, sir?" I gave a brief nod and stepped back. However, I thought I observed water trickling down the crewman's shoes as he walked away, leaving no evidence. I ought to have reported it at that time. I should have spoken to someone at guest services. But I remained silent for some reason, perhaps her warning. I was unaware at the time that she desired silence. That night I hardly slept at all. I dreamed of dripping footsteps outside my cabin door every time I fell asleep. The ship's engines would be the only sound I could hear as I woke up, my heart racing. I convinced myself I was being paranoid by morning. At sea, people frequently have hallucinations, don't they? Something about the recycled air, the rocking. However, the fib was exposed when I went up for breakfast, because she had returned. Like any other child waiting for her parents, she sat at a table close to the juice station and swung her legs. However, nobody sat with her. There was nothing on her plate. She never blinked at anything. She grinned when she saw me. Not in a nice way. More like to someone concealing something from you. In the middle of the buffet line, I froze. As they loaded up on bacon and scrambled eggs and talked about their adventures, passengers pushed by me. She was gone by the time I summoned the courage to approach her. The chair continued to wobble a little, as if it had just been left. What about the floor underneath it? Damp. I concluded that I wasn't insane. I made the decision to verify her authenticity. I halted one of the crew members. A young lady with neatly styled hair and a clean white uniform. "Pardon me," I said. "A young girl is out on her own, wandering around. Pale skin, black hair, perhaps 12. I just saw her." Her smile wavered. Only a small portion. "Sir, what is her name?" she inquired. She tilted her head almost reflexively, saying, I don't know. Every minor on board is monitored by us. You must be wrong." "No, I'm not." She regained her smile. "I swear I saw her." After saying, "Then enjoy your breakfast, sir," she abruptly left. The remainder of that day was a haze, with children laughing in the pool, gambling machines ringing in the casino, and an elderly man playing Sweet Caroline on the piano in the lounge. The ship was a hive of activity. However, I sensed that people were watching me wherever I went. I would see her dress shimmer in the hallway mirrors. A little giggle that didn't belong would drift through the passenger shuffle. I told myself over and over again that I was chasing shadows. However, I heard the cabin door creak open as I laid in bed that night. Very slowly, a shadow crept in. Tiny, kid-sized. I remained motionless. I locked my chest. My mouth became parched. With bare feet rustling the carpet, the shadow moved closer. She came to a stop next to me. I sensed the chill emanating from her. Her damp hair touched my cheek as she bent down. I don't recall going to sleep after she said, "You shouldn't have told them," in the dark. I just lay there with all of my muscles tensed with fear, staring at the ceiling. The damp patch on my pillow where her hair had brushed me was the sole indication that it wasn't a nightmare. It was dry in the morning. However, I was unable to. Determined to find answers this time, I headed to guest services. I described her to the desk attendant, a middle-aged man with courteous eyes who listened patiently. "No one fits that description, sir," he answered softly. "Children are not permitted to wander unattended. I can send security to check your deck if you want." "Do it," I yelled. He wrote something on a clipboard and nodded. However, I saw that his pen was motionless. He wasn't even writing. The point was simply pressed into the paper until it ripped. He was grinning more broadly as I looked back up. "We'll investigate," he stated bluntly, and he nodded, dismissing me. I realized then that the crew would not assist. So I chose to do my own research. I always had my phone with me. Hallways that were filmed. Captured images of mirrors. Tried to capture her in doorways, shadows, and reflections. The majority of the time, the video returned blank. Just static and hazy lights. However, I once caught a glimpse of her in the mirror of a stairway window. It's crystal clear. And I came to a realization after watching the video again. She didn't give me a look. She was ignoring me, above my shoulder, at something that was invisible to me. I didn't go to my cabin that night. Instead, I followed the people as I roamed the ship. I found myself near the lifeboats on deck 11 at around midnight. The salt and the low moan of the waves pricked the air. The majority of the passengers were fast sleeping. I heard it at that point. A voice. Tiny. Gentle. "Eric." I stopped. Her ivory dress fluttered, and her hair blew in the wind as she stood by the railing. "How are you aware of my name?" I muttered. Her head was cocked. I started to ask for more, but her expression altered. "Because you're the one who listens." She stopped smiling. Her eyes became wide with terror. She then gestured behind me. I pivoted. There was no one on the deck. Swaying on their hooks were lifeboats, just shadows. She was gone when I turned around. As if she had climbed directly out of the ocean, the railing where she had stood was dripping wet. I was trembling by the time I got back to my cabin. It wasn't until I almost trod on the folded piece of paper that I realized it had been pushed beneath my door. It wasn't stationary from the hotel. The paper was water-stained and wrinkled. 3 words were written on it: "Don't go below." I gazed at the wet note till the words ingrained themselves in my mind. Don't go below. But what exactly does below mean? Engine room? Decks for storage? Every hallway felt like a trapdoor ready to let me into something I wasn't intended to see after I had only barely explored half of the ship. I stuffed the paper into my pocket and made a self-promise to stay away from those places, follow the throngs, and stay on the higher decks. Easy. The ship, however, had other ideas. My key card stopped functioning the following morning. I went to the help desk and described the problem. Without saying a word, the attendant, a young man this time, smiling nervously, handed me a replacement. The replacement card also failed to open the door when I returned to my cabin. I tried again, but the small screen over the handle showed cabin not found, the same outcome. As they passed, the passengers hardly gave me a glance. The obvious glitch went unnoticed. I signaled a steward. "Hey, I can't get my key to work." "Are you able to assist?" He scanned the card after taking it. "Cabin not found." The screen flickered once more, and he gave me a look as if I were a stranger. "Are you certain you're on this deck, sir? I've spent the entire week here," I yelled. "Cabin 723. After a moment of hesitation, he lowered his voice. "Casin 723 is not there." He then turned to leave. I was plagued with panic. I hurried up the hallway, inspecting each door. 721, 722, 724 cabin. However, there was nothing but a blank wall where my door should have been, as if my room had been completely engulfed by the ship. I staggered back, clutching the railing, feeling lightheaded. I saw her again at that point. The young woman. Her hair was hanging forward and pouring over the carpet as she knelt at the far end of the hall. She said, "You weren't supposed to tell them." "I didn't," I yelled. My voice broke. Her brows furrowed as she said, I kept it quiet, I swear." "So why are they observing you?" I whirled. Passengers lined the corridor behind me, dozens of them, staring, silent. Children holding pool toys, women wearing sundresses, and men wearing polo shirts. Seawater was pouring down their faces, all obstructing the sole way out. I ran, pushed past them. Their damp, slippery arms brushed against me. Not sturdy, not living. I continued until I came to a stairwell. Flight after flight, I hammered down, the air getting damper and colder, each step reverberating too long, as if the ship's stairwell extended more than it should. I was breathless by the time I exploded into a lower corridor. Down here, the walls were different. They were corroded, leaking, and resembled a submarine rather than an upscale cruise ship. The obscurity was hardly broken by the dull orange flickering lights, and the words, "Welcome below, Eric," were inscribed in black, dripping characters over the far wall. That's when I realized I hadn't gone down here. I had been selected by the ship, and I wasn't by myself. The hallway went on and on, pipes creaking as if they held something alive, metal bulkheads perspiring with salt water. It felt as though the ship itself was drawing me closer as my shoes squeaked on the ground, getting heavier with each step. Faint footsteps reverberated behind me, but they weren't mine. It's too light, too fast. I pivoted. Halfway down the hallway, the girl stood, the same black garment clinging to her body, the same damp hair plastered to her cheeks. Her head cocked, and I swear her jaw unfastened a little in that distorted low light, as if it weren't meant to speak. Her voice gurgled as if it were coming through water when she replied, "You shouldn't be here. This is not what I wanted." My voice bounced back in metallic distortion as I yelled, "Please let me go." Her gaze strayed to the wall. I froze and said, "Then give it back." "Return what?" She gestured to my pocket with one wet hand. The message, "Don't go below." I tore it out and held it like a shield in front of me. It's only paper. Someone slipped it beneath my door." I was interrupted by her scream. Low, guttural, like the hull moaning under strain, but not loud. The hallway behind her then filled. Dozens of individuals. Every face I had seen in the dining rooms, movie theaters, and pool decks. Couples, families, and lone travelers. They were swollen, pallid, and dripping with seawater now. They both opened their mouths simultaneously. A sound rolled out of them, a combination of voices requesting assistance and the sound of waves breaking beneath the surface. I retreated till I struck a steel hatch with my shoulders. It wasn't locked and was labeled "Engine Access, Authorized Crew Only." I stumbled inside after yanking it open. It should have been deafening in the engine room. Rather, there was silence. Algal-slick giant turbines stood motionless. There was no draft, yet chains swayed from the ceiling. The floor was covered in pools of water, which were still except for the occasional bubble. and there's a table in the middle of the space. A ledger rests on top of rust-eaten metal. With every instinct telling me to run, I took a step closer. A page with tidy names was open in the ledger. Thousands, perhaps hundreds, names of the passengers. Heavy black ink was used to cross out some words every few lines, and mine was at the bottom, freshly scribbled in damp brush strokes. Crossed out is Eric Lane, cabin 723. My chest tightened as I staggered back. That was not feasible. I was still here. There I stood. The girl silently materialized at my side. Her hair brushed my cheek as she leaned in close, soaking my shirt with cold water. "You didn't board," she muttered. My breath caught when I heard, "You drowned before they let you on." Her smile grew as she said, "That's not true." Water poured from her mouth's corners. "So why don't people remember you?" I heard thunderous footsteps behind me. With their eyes dripping seawater and their faces blank, the drowned passengers flooded into the room, filling every available space. I pressed myself up against the table. The ledger touched my hand. Then, instinctively, I grabbed the pen. I can't recall making a choice. I can't recall writing. However, I noticed a new line as I looked down. Eric Lane, returned. The audience broke off. Each and every figure turned to face me. They grinned as well. In my cabin, I awoke. Dry. Through the porthole, sunlight. With distant laughter resonating down the halls and the hum of the engines, the ship felt alive once more. I briefly believed it to be a nightmare. However, my cabin door was missing. No handle, not a seam. Where the exit should have been, there was only a smooth, blank wall. The carpet was completely drenched when I looked down. Don't come seeking for me if you're listening to this. If this recording somehow escapes the ship, never even attempt to guess what below means. Simply subscribe. Because someone else must continue to share these stories before they are lost, if my story ends here. Because you're never going to leave, once the ship determines that you never boarded. Story 3. Why are there more lifeboats than passengers? The man said it without even glancing at me. His shirt was half untucked as he leaned on the outer rail, his sweat-slick forehead becoming yellow from the ship's deck lights. His comments were nearly muffled by the roar of the ship's engines, and his slurred voice gave me the impression that he was intoxicated. More than his tone, though. I was frozen by the way his gaze followed the lines of lifeboats dangling from their davits, as if he were counting each one individually. I nearly questioned his meaning. Rather, I smiled awkwardly and moved past, as most people do when confronted with unnerving drivel from a stranger. That one choice was going to cost me dearly. Lauren Pierce is my name. I'm a 34-year-old middle school counselor from Portland, Oregon. Theoretically, my life should feel routine and stable. I'm the one who tries to reassure them that the world isn't as bad as it seems in their minds, who helps them cope with panic attacks, and who keeps their secrets about self-harm or violent parents. Additionally, I can usually fake it convincingly enough for them to believe me. In actuality, though, only a few months prior, my own world had fallen apart. After a protracted and cruel battle with cancer, my mother, my anchor, passed away. Hospice visits, nocturnal calls, and the persistent antiseptic stench of hospitals dominated my life during the latter year of her life. I expected to feel relieved when she eventually died. My apartment felt more like a mausoleum instead. I booked the cruise for that reason. A week on the Pacific with no obligations, just peace and quiet and wide waters. It would help me breathe again, I told myself. I kept the fact that I hadn't really spoken to a man since my mom's diagnosis, a secret from my coworkers, who even made a joke about me returning tan, refreshed, and perhaps ready to get back out there. This vacation was not an adventure for me. If only for a short while I was going to vanish. It was tremendous, the ship itself. The Celestia Dawn features a miniature golf course, 12 decks, several swimming pools, and even a fictitious piazza with painted ceilings and violin music played through concealed speakers. It should have impressed me. Rather, as soon as I got on board, I could feel a deep, vibrating hum beneath my feet, like a steel-buried heartbeat. When I was lying in my cabin that first night, I thought it was simply the engines, but I swear I felt it breathe beneath me. The days were hazy. I spent an hour in the casino watching folks applaud for blackjack, eating buffets where the scent of fried food stuck to my hair, and lounging in the sun with a book in an attempt to decompress. However, minor details caught my attention. Similar to the dining room, I went down at around 9 o'clock on my second night for a late snack. Half the tables were entirely empty, not only in between seatings, even though the room should have been bustling. On the counters were trays of unfinished meals, steam long since chilled. A server looked at me as if I had asked him what planet we were on when I asked him whether the establishment had closed early. Then, with a rigid smile, he remarked, "Everything is as scheduled, ma'am." I attempted to use the elevator from Deck 6 to Deck 9 one more evening. There was no 7 button on the panel. The strangest part? I thought maybe 7 was crew only, but when I looked at the deck chart in the foyer, it indicated 7 as passenger cabins. The map had changed by the time I checked it again the following morning. Deck 7 had vanished. Nevertheless, I dismissed it. Ships can be confusing. Perhaps I was worn out. Perhaps my brain was still malfunctioning due to grief. I reminded myself of all that. Up until I discovered the door. It was mid-afternoon on the third day. In order to get my steps in, I chose to use the stairs rather than the elevator and forego the pool. I saw a tiny landing with a metal door between decks 6 and 8. Normally that would have been enough to keep me away, but the notice said crew access only. However, the handle was not secured. I pushed it out of habit. The passageway felt a little off as the door creaked open. The carpet was worn in spots and had a darker color. The walls were scratched and scuffed, as if someone had dragged their baggage down them. More dimly than anywhere else on the ship, the lights above buzzed softly. And it was quiet, so quiet that I could hear a small trickle of water down the corridor. I initially believed it to be only a storage corridor. Then I noticed the cabin doors. The numbers were odd, but they lined both sides exactly like passenger rooms. 7 to 21, 7 to 23, 7 to 25. Then 7 to 41 was skipped, not on July 27th, 29, or 31. It was as if entire rooms had been deleted, and the chronology made no sense. My heart pounded. I glanced at the closed doors as I moved carefully. I kind of thought someone on the crew would yell at me when one opened. However, nothing moved. Just my own footsteps, too harsh, too loud. The corridor was longer than the ship could have been. I said, "That's enough," while attempting to control my breathing. I went back in the direction of the stairwell. However, it wasn't present. A further corridor stretched into the darkness behind me. My chest constricted. My flats thumped on the thin carpet as I walked more quickly. "Lauren, you're all right. You're all right." Then, as if someone had pressed a switch, the stairwell door appeared once more. It was exactly where it ought to have been. I didn't consider. Without pausing till I exploded inside the casino, I pushed it open and ran upward. Tourists clapping around a table, neon lights, and chiming gambling machines. It was a face-slapping noise. Gasping, my hands shaking, I leaned on the railing. Nobody took notice. I was just another woman who had lost a wager in their eyes. On that cruise, that was the last typical thing I saw. I tried to tell myself I had just dreamed it the following morning. Choose between stress, grief, or the ship's constant motion. There was no such hallway. Not at all. I even ran my finger down each level that was identified on the laminated deck map that they had hidden in my welcome folder. 6, 7, 8. Nothing about omitted room numbers or secret passages. Only clean squares and lines. Even so, I sensed that people were watching me when I left my cabin for breakfast. Not the casual looks you receive when strangers assess one another while on vacation. They were slower, heavier. The crew let me catch them. In the corridor, A housekeeper stopped in the middle of wiping her towel and watched me until I went by. My reflection in the mirror was followed for far longer than required by a bartender wiping glasses. I attempted to smile, but he swiftly averted his gaze, seemingly caught. I piled my plate high with fruit and eggs at the buffet, but the food tasted stale, as if it had been sitting for hours. A family of 4 at the next table over laughed excessively at nothing and moved a little slowly, as though they were imitating the appearance of typical families. My teeth hurt with each clink of their forks. I made myself ask at the guest services desk after breakfast. I passed the deck map across the bar and said, "Hello," to the man behind the counter, who had a name tag that read Adrian and a flawless business grin. "Is there anything you can clarify? I observed a door last night, between 6 and 8 on a landing. It led to what appeared to be another cabin corridor. However, it's not visible here." Adrian didn't even look at the map. He continued to smile. "Ma'am, all passenger locations that are accessible have obvious labels." "No, this had cabin numbers. You must have thought it was a service door. 7s, 21, 23. Signage gets replaced slowly sometimes." He interrupted, his tone bland under the praise. "Deck 7 does not have passenger access." "So what are those rooms used for?" I asked, using more effort than I ought to have. His smile faded for a single fleeting moment. He clenched his jaw, then it returned as fast as it had appeared. "Crew quarters for rest. I promise you, there is nothing of interest to you." Before I could ask more questions, another person approached the counter and yelled about shore excursions. Adrian looked aside abruptly, like if I had never spoken anything. With a pounding heart, I left. Restrooms for the crew? With numbers and doors like a passenger. And that hall was much longer than it ought to have been. I was still paranoid by the middle of the afternoon. I had the impression that I was circling something that didn't add up each time I went through the decks. The ship was both too small and too large. Stairwells stopped in walls, corridors doubled back, and doors appeared where I was certain they hadn't been the day before. To pass the time that evening, I participated in a trivia game at one of the lounges. While passengers scrawled replies, the host, a lively lady with a microphone and a false smile, posed questions. I was matched with an elderly Phoenix couple, good enough folks. However, I noticed something odd midway through the game. The woman was wearing the same shirt that I had seen on another traveler the previous evening. Not only comparable, exactly the same, right down to the tiny rip close to the cuff. She added, "We're all family here, aren't we?" with a flawless smile, so I guess I stared at her for too long. Her tone was too relaxed, too practiced. With my heart pounding, I excused myself before the game was over. I ought to have returned to my cabin and secured the door. But more than terror, curiosity tore at me. I returned to the stairway and stood in front of the same crew-only door at 11 that evening. In my hand, the handle felt cool. I briefly believed that this time it would be locked. However, it turned with the same ease as previously. It was dark now as the passageway extended ahead. Colder. After hesitating, I entered. The typical noise of the ship was muffled as the door snapped shut behind me. The sound of my breath was too loud. This time, the numbering was more unusual. 7 to 21, 7 to 23, 7 to 25. Next, 7 to 41. Then again, 7 to 21. I came to a complete stop. Twice, 3 times, my gaze followed the brass plate. I had just passed the identical room number. Half expecting my hand to slide through, I stretched out and touched it. It was a solid metal. Chilly. Something murmured from within. No sound. Not precisely. It sounds too rhythmic, almost like breathing, and more like the sound of water pouring through pipes. With my heart thumping in my ears, I retreated. Then, I heard footsteps. Slow. Intentional. From a location farther down the corridor. I turned, but there was nobody in sight, and the hallway went on forever. The constant sound of sneakers on carpet and that slight trickle of water getting closer. I didn't wait to find out what or who was approaching. I whirled around, ran back to the stairway, and yanked the door open until it hit the wall. The sound abruptly stopped. The ship's hum reappeared, and the faint sound of laughter drifted down from the casino 2 decks above. Shaking, I leaned my forehead against the cool door metal. My hands continued to shake. It dawned on me then, there was no lock on the door. The hall was waiting, constantly. Additionally, there was movement inside. I didn't get any sleep that evening. I could hear those steady, measured footsteps walking toward me across that unattainable hallway every time I closed my eyes. My body hurt from sleeping still on the slender bed with my eyes fixed on the ceiling by morning. I was shocked by the mirror over the desk when I eventually pushed myself up. It appeared as though I hadn't slept for days because my skin was gray. When I cocked my head, my reflection felt off, lagging half a second behind. I convinced myself I was dreaming when I turned on the toilet light and stared till my reflection caught up. I was certain the team knew by breakfast. The grins tightened. The salutations were more formal. I received long, questioning glances from even passengers I had never talked to. With his eyes fixed on me, a man wearing a Hawaiian shirt said something to his wife. A young girl gazed for so long that I yelled, "What?" She simply turned away with a smile that was too big for her face. I didn't use guest services. Another courteous dismissal was not what I wanted to hear. Rather, I tried to enjoy the cruise during the day, a movie in the theater, pool, and trivia games. However, there were doubles everywhere I went. That same blouse that I had previously seen on 2 women, I seen it on 3 now. Too close for him to have walked between, the same man in khakis and a striped shirt showed up on the top deck, then by the casino, and finally by the elevator. Perhaps I had dreamed about the footsteps that night. Perhaps the sound was distorted by adrenaline. Perhaps there wouldn't be anything there if I opened the door again. So, defying logic, I returned. It was easy to turn the handle. The dull yellow light within the corridor seemed to be killing the bulbs themselves. Now there was terrible numbers. July 21st, 23, July 41, July 21st, July 19th. Out of order, the sequence scrambled and repeated. I made myself walk farther than I had previously. The carpet became wet and squished slightly beneath my feet. The scent of iron and mildew filled the air. I went past a door with the number 7 to 23 halfway down. A tiny knock came from inside. 3 raps. Slow. Too methodical. I went cold. My throat tightened. Then the knob turned before I could move away. There was just darkness when the door cracked open an inch. Then, an eye. Through the opening, I saw a human eye, moist and bloodshot, staring at me. I staggered back and crashed into the wall across from me. The door opened wider, yet the blackness itself seemed to flow forward, heavy and thick like tar, rather than a human coming out. The eye was eaten whole and vanished into it. My head didn't move until my legs did. I took off running. The corridor was long. The longer it got, the more I ran. The room numbers 7 to 21, 7 to 41, 7 to 23, 7 to 21, blinked past me interminably. I was slowed down by the wet carpet sucking at my shoes. Footsteps began again somewhere behind me. Stable, not hurried, not frantic. Be patient. Something back there seemed to know I couldn't outrun it. I let out a yell. The air swallowed the sound, making it feel flat. Finally, the entrance to the stairwell appeared. It slammed open as I lunged, spilling out onto the well-known landing. With my chest heaving, I fell against the railing. Silence for a minute. Then a voice came, so faint I almost thought I had dreamed it, through the metal door, whispering. My name was said. 2 at a time, I bounded up the stairs and continued till I arrived at the main deck. It wasn't the relief I was hoping for, but the night air hit me like ice. There was nothing on the deck, nothing at all, nothing at all. No waiters emptying glasses, no couples by the rails, not even a drunk stumbling back from the bar. There was silence on board. Then there was the faint sound of music from above. Tiny, distorted, like a gramophone beneath water. It was a sluggish, erratic ballroom waltz that continued into the night. Legs trembling, I followed it until I came to the glass doors that opened into the midship lounge. The space was bathed in a golden glow when the chandeliers within were illuminated. It was also filled. In slow circles, dozens of passengers danced, their motions rigid and robotic. Like an unfocused image, their faces were smudged and blurred. The waltz veered in and out, accelerating and slowing at different points. One of the dancers halted when I put my palm to the glass and said, "What the hell?" Its head jerked 90 degrees and snapped toward me in a manner that no neck should. Through the blur, I could feel its eyes. The others came after me one by one, their faces turning to face me, muddy eyes meeting mine. The music ceased. I stumbled away from the glass, but the door handle turned slowly and rattled by itself. Once more, I ran. The hallways coiled about themselves. My memorized layout was incorrect. The elevators did not lead to the floors indicated by the buttons. Despite the fact that it was abandoned in different locations each time, I passed the identical cleaning cart 3 times. The door slammed behind me with a ferocity that rattled the frame as I finally exploded into my cabin. I could hear my breath in the small room, yet something wasn't quite right. Once more, the carpet was wet. I had lost my suitcase. A solitary item, a black and white photograph, was placed face down on the desk in its stead. I lifted it up and felt sick to my stomach. I was the one, earlier that day, standing by the railing. Not exactly me, though. The grin was too sharp, the eyes too far apart, and the figure's face too wide. A large shadow with a hand on its shoulder stood behind the man, barely out of frame. The picture escaped my grasp. At first, I was completely unaware that the cabin door had opened once more. There was someone, or something, in the picture, not moving, simply observing. The figure in the doorway remained motionless. I could feel the pounding of my heart in my jaw. Although it was tough to distinguish details in the faint light of the cabin, I knew what I was looking at. The head tilted in that strange angle I had noticed through the lounge glass. The shoulders were too high, and the arms were too long. "Who's there?" As soon as it was gone, my voice broke. The object did not respond. Then the lights flashed, once, twice, and it came closer in that moment of strobing. Halfway through the cabin, I reached for the desk chair, the only weapon that sprang to mind. I threw it as hard as I could at the figure. The entryway was empty, but the chair clattered against the wall. Before I heard voices and felt a weight on the carpet and its wet squish beneath my feet, I thought I had lost it. Inside my ears, not in front of me, not behind me, a distorted echo of a voice saying my name. I ran. Outside, the corridor was wobbling as though the entire ship had sunk. The walls narrowed near the ceiling and curled incorrectly. Every cabin I visited had its doors open, but it was deserted, with beds unmade, luggage tossed aside, and water glasses still shaky on nightstands as though someone had just departed. I yelled for assistance. My voice was lost in the shadows. I heard heavy footsteps coming from somewhere behind me. Slow. Intentional. I pushed my way through a fire exit and staggered down a stairwell. Instead of leading to another hallway, the metal door opened straight onto an unfamiliar deck. Like a football field spread out over the ocean, it was too long. The smell of brine and rust filled the air as the wind thrashed at me. Dozens of passengers were standing there, lined up along the railing, completely still, utterly quiet. They were all looking directly at the dark horizon. With my heart racing, I took a step closer. They were dressed in outfits that were decades out of style, with gowns and suits that looked like they belonged in an old snapshot. Their eyes were empty voids gazing out to sea, and their skin was waxy and pallid. The deck continued even after I retreated. It continued to stretch, the rows of somber travelers growing in number no matter how far I traveled. The spacecraft let out a deep, mechanical groan that sent shivers down my spine. A PA system crackled to life somewhere above. "Ladies and gentlemen, we thank you for choosing the Crescent Star," a composed female voice said. "Please stay motionless until the last departure." The passengers all turned at once. Now all of their faceless eyes were fixed on me. I sprinted, racing across an endless deck. Even though my lungs ached and my legs screamed, the ship itself seemed to move beneath me, extending the distance between each stride. My throat ripped as I yelled, but the sound didn't travel. At last, my body failed me. Gasping, I fell against the railing. Below lay a flat, limitless ocean that was darker than night. At that moment, I noticed my image in the dark water. I wasn't the one. The mirror smiled. Its eyes grew hollow. Its mouth grew unnaturally large, and its teeth resembled shattered glass. A tall shadow behind it put its hand on my shoulder. At first, I didn't notice anything, but when I looked down, I saw that a pale, skeletal hand was indeed laying there as well. I went cold, unable to breathe, unable to move. The voice in my ear again, this time gentle and understanding, said, "You're one of us now." The screen goes dark. That was the last thing I remembered. No escape, no rescue. Just the boundless sea. The ship that never docks, too. I impulsively booked the cruise. The cheap last-minute deal, 5 nights at sea, all-inclusive, an opportunity to block out the world, felt like fate because work had been dragging me down. The email confirmation appeared to be quite typical, but one particular item stood out: Cabin 4107. I attempted to Google the deck designs, but the number never appeared. All of the websites I looked at skipped directly from 4106 to 4108. However, the confirmation was unmistakable. I assumed it was simply old schematics. It's true that ships undergo constant remodeling. Nevertheless, there was something off about the ship when I got on board, my suitcase rattling behind me. Too silent. Like an ancient cassette tape, the welcome music was somewhat distorted as it played through the speakers. The crew grinned, but they didn't follow you with their eyes as they usually do. The attendant smiling stopped as I presented my boarding pass at the front desk. After looking at the paper and her computer, she turned back to face me. Cabin 4107? Slowly, as if she wasn't sure she had read it correctly, she repeated. "Yes," I said. "Is something wrong?" She made a small line with her lips. "No issue, sir. Enjoy your stay." However, her hand shook as she returned the card key. There was no music or conversation throughout the oddly quiet elevator ride up. The corridor extended in perfect symmetry as the doors opened onto Deck 4, with numbered doors neatly arranged along both sides. 4th, 4105, 4106, and then a blank wall. 4107. My heart fell. I briefly believed I had been duped. Then I saw it, a slight indentation in the wall that resembled the trace of a closed doorway. And there was a gentle click as I slid my keycard across the blank panel. The wall opened. The cabin appeared to be very typical inside: desk, bed, and tiny bathroom. It was a little musty, like if it hadn't been broadcast in years, but not really noteworthy. Aside from the odor. Seawater. Clinging to everything. Salty and sharp. I put my bag down and pulled the curtain over the porthole. I was looking at another wall instead of the open sea, a blank length of steel, as if the cabin were pressed against some unseen bulkhead. Not a sight. No illumination. A piece of paper with the words, "Don't stay the night," written on it in unsteady handwriting was taped to the desk, yellowed and curling at the edges. I convinced myself it was a joke. Perhaps a former visitor is teasing the current and potential residents, but I couldn't get the note out of my head. The remainder of the day seemed to fly by. I relaxed on the sundeck, wandered the buffet, and looked around the ship. Loud families, children swimming in the pool, and pensioners holding tropical beverages. All appeared to be typical. However, the more time I spent surrounded by the commotion, the more I felt out of place. I kept thinking about that wall, that door, that secret room. The corridor had changed when I eventually made it back to my cabin. Reduced the brightness. Additionally, I can assure you that less people were passing by. I swiped my keycard and the wall opened again. I thought it wouldn't. The air inside was colder than before, wet, similar to subterranean concrete. On the desk, something fresh was waiting. Water in a glass, it's half full. Fresh condensation beads on the outside. I had not stopped there. I kept my hands off of it. I didn't want to breathe near it at all. I listened while lying in bed at midnight. The cabin's walls weren't quiet. They throbbed, moaning. I occasionally heard what sounded like moving water, as if I were in the ship's belly with the ocean pressing down on me. I must have fallen asleep at one point because I woke up to a noise that had every hair on my arm stand up. Inhaling. Wet, slow breaths from the shadowed nook by the restroom door. I went cold. I remained motionless, without even blinking. Simply gazed. The corner appeared deserted. However, the sound persisted. Then, there were 3 knocks on the wall inside my bathroom. As though someone on the other side wanted me to respond, there were 3 knocks that were muted through steel. I scurried to find the lights. Silence when they flicked on. The corner is empty. However, the sink's mirror dripped with seawater, as if the waves had splattered on it. I went to reception the following morning. I desired to change cabins. I was not going to stay in that tomb. The receptionist politely listened to my explanation while entering information into her computer. Then she gave me the same icy smile as she looked up. I just stared at her as she whispered softly, "I'm sorry, sir, but there isn't cabin 4107. "What?" She slowly shook her head, saying, "I slept there last night." I slammed my keycard against the counter and said, "That cabin doesn't exist. So what is this?" She took it up. Like the first attendants, her hand trembled. After taking a short look at the magnetic strip, she hurriedly put it in a drawer under the desk so it would be hidden. She said softly, "I'll have someone check on your concern, but I advise you not to return there." Before I could counter, a second traveler emerged behind me, noisily lamenting a misplaced suitcase. The front desk employee waved me off. Talk is concluded. I had nowhere else to go that evening. With the sea wind stinging my face, I stayed on the deck until it was almost empty. But after a while, fatigue forced me to return to that hallway and that blank wall. Like it had been waiting. The wall opened when my card touched it. There was no glass of water on the desk inside. It was replaced by a journal. The cover was distorted by moisture and was old and leather-bound. I turned to the first page of it. The handwriting was uneven and jagged. The journal pages were creased, stained with damp, and some of the ink had bled so severely that it appeared to be veins across the paper. If you are reading this, it means the cabin found you too. With the mild vibrations of the ship humming beneath me, I sat at the desk and read under the dull yellow lighting. The cabin isn't listed on the manifest. They told me the same thing they undoubtedly told you, that it doesn't exist, but it does. It finds you when you're not supposed to be here. I reached the last page. My stomach grew constricted. The next entry was smeared, but the words I could make out froze me. "Don't drink the water. Don't look in the mirror too long. Don't answer if it knocks." I checked the blueprints in the library. This hallway doesn't align with the others. The measurements don't add up. Cabin 4107. It's not on the ship. It's inside the ship. I closed the journal and pushed it away. Then I heard it again, from behind the bathroom door, breathing. It was heavier and louder this time, and each inhalation ended with a gurgle that sounded like liquid filling the lungs. My trembling hand hovered over the doorknob. I warned myself not to open it or touch it. The doorknob then turned by itself. The door cracked an inch open and I staggered back. Inside, it was dark. The heavy, foul stench of brine rolled out. "Who's there?" My voice broke. A damp murmur replied, "You." I ran away, down the hall, out of the cabin. I craved distance, regardless of the crew's claim that it didn't exist. However, I encountered a man in uniform as I reached the corner leading to the stairway. Safety. I was grabbed by the shoulders by him. "Simple, sir. What appears to be the issue?" I stumbled. I don't know how to explain this. There's something wrong with my cabin. 4107. The number made his face twitch. There's someone in there. For a moment only. Then his face changed. "Cabin 4107? He asked thoughtfully. Indeed. He didn't put it in writing, didn't request that I show him. He simply nodded sternly and said, "I'll take care of it." Then he moved in closer, his voice low enough for me to hear. "Avoid returning there. I didn't sleep that night, so whatever you do, don't tell anyone else about the door." My eyes stung from staring out at the black ocean while sitting in a lounge. A woman eventually took a seat across from me. Crisp, silver hair, early 50s, with a cruise lanyard still around her neck. "Did you not see it?" she inquired without introducing herself. My blood froze. "What did you see?" "The extra cabin." I remained silent, but, as if she already knew, she gave a sorrowful grin. She said, "It found my husband on our last trip. He entered the house. Before I could ask her another question, she departed. He never came out. I sought to find solutions the following day." As stated in the log, I looked through the ship's library, though most of the publications were tourist nonsense. But I discovered something strange in a binder labeled Deck Plans. The cabin numbers on this floor's schematic were 4105, 4106, and 4108, 4107. However, the spacing appeared incorrect. Between 4106 and 4108, there was an excessive amount of blank wall, as if something had been purposefully removed. I could see faint pencil traces beneath the print as I traced the outline with my finger. "The drowned don't stay in the water. They want rooms," someone had scrawled, nearly obscured by the overlay. "The drowned don't stay in the water. They want rooms." That evening, when I went back to my designated cabin, the one I had been moved to, the keycard wasn't functional. I returned to the front desk. After tapping on her keyboard, the attendant scowled. "Unusual," she whispered. She gave me a fresh card and said, "It indicates that you have already checked back into your previous cabin." My stomach dropped as I saw the printed number, 4107. I stood looking at the card in the lobby. 4107 was the number that pierced my vision. My heart pounded on my skull. The receptionist's grin was overly radiant. "Is there anything more I can do to assist you?" I wanted to yell at her and tell her to give me another room, but I could hear the continuous, faint sound of water leaking behind her desk drawer. As if she could hear it too, she cocked her head slightly. I murmured, "No," and turned to leave. I had never seen the hallway leading to 4107 so deserted. My footsteps were muted by the carpet, but I swear I could hear footsteps behind me that were exactly in time with mine. The wall was already open when I got there. The door opened like a mouth, ready to suck me in. The journal was open on the desk, with a new page turned. The words were still shimmering and the ink was new. The air was saltier and colder than before. "You can't leave now. The cabin remembers you." Even though I hadn't ran any water, the restroom mirror was foggy. Pale outlines moved as though they were on the other side of a window, and shapes moved behind the glass. I made an attempt to go. Yes, I did. However, the hallway beyond wasn't correct when I yanked the door open. There was decay in the carpet. Above, the lights flickered, and black rivulets of water ran down the walls. I realized I wasn't in a hallway at all as I staggered forward. My heart in my throat. I was in a hallway that was no longer part of this spacecraft. The numbers of the cabin doors that extended on either side were incorrect. Dates are displayed on faded metal plates rather than numbers. 1952, 1974, 1989. Like fingernails clawing from the inside, each door was scratched. And I heard the knock once more, somewhere far down that impossibly long hall. There were 3 slow raps that seemed to come from all the doors at once. I slammed the door shut and backed into my cabin. There was no journal left. It was replaced by the glass of water, which was now completely full, with seawater trickling down the carpet from over the rim. Someone knocked on my bathroom door. So I didn't wait this time. I opened the door with a yank. For the first time, someone else was reflected in the cleansed mirror. A man with gray skin, blue lips, and hair stuck to his forehead, dressed in a soaked suit. He touched the other side of the glass with his hand. I had lost my own reflection. Water gushed out of his mouth as he opened it. It was in gallons. The mirror broke. Seawater flooded over me, bursting into the chamber with a roar. When I rushed to the door, it refused to open. My lungs were burning. The person climbing through the mirror, wet, grinning and whispering, "You're mine now," was the last thing I saw before I passed out. I woke up choking on the carpet. It was all dry, no water. The mirror is in good condition, nothing but quiet. I stumbled over and wrenched open the door. The hallway appeared normal this time. People went by as if nothing had happened. A family chuckled. A kid pulled a plush dolphin across the floor. However, my stomach fell as I saw the cabin number. All of the hall's doors read 4107, each door. Every brass plate shone the same, 4107. I whirled about, the hallway extending indefinitely, one identical door engulfing the next. The family I had just seen had stopped laughing. Except for myself and the faint sound of water pouring from the ceiling, the corridor was suddenly deserted. I randomly selected a door and yanked it open. The same cabin inside, same desk, the same wet carpet, identical mirror. I tried the next one and slammed it shut. The same cabin once more. My chest ached with panic. Every door opened into 4107 as I dashed through them, pushing through one after another. The glass of water eventually reappeared. Sweating drips down its sides, constantly half full. It was on the desk at times, the nightstand occasionally. I discovered it waiting for me, nicely balanced on the side of the bed. I didn't consume it. I never drank it, please. The journal also came back. Ink smeared across the paper as though it were being written in real time, and pages turned forward on their own. You will either drink or drown. The cabin wants company. Don't try to leave. There is no leaving. Time ceased to mean anything. I'm not sure if days or hours went by. Everything vanished, including the ports, the other passengers, and the cruise schedule. There was no signal on my phone. No timer went off. The knock, patient and steady, always 3 raps, always from the bathroom wall, was the only beat. I put my ear to it once. I swear I heard sounds gurgling and garbled like somebody shouting underwater, coming from the opposite side. On another occasion, I saw a glimpse of movement in the mirror. A group of people waiting, their faces pale, crowded together, just beyond the broken glass. I was unable to look for long. They had the incorrect eye. The sound of my cries for assistance was muffled by the walls. I knocked on the door, but nobody answered. I was finally broken by exhaustion. I fell to the desk and gazed at the journal. When I reached the final page, my hand trembled. Till the next one was the lone line, freshly written in seawater dripping ink, and my name was below it. At that point, I realized, you are not completely killed by the cabin. It retains you. You become a part of its cycle as a result. I had been reading that journal, written by others who came before me. Long gone names and lives have been obliterated, but their warnings have been kept in place, drawing the next unfortunate person closer. It was my time now. I'm not sure how you're getting this story. Perhaps you're simply listening to me talk in the dark, or perhaps you happened into an unintentional recording. However, if you're listening, I implore you to never go on a cruise. Additionally, if you are on one, never enter a cabin that isn't marked on the map. Because the door never closes after it opens for you. The knock is the final sound on the tape. 3 slow raps. The sound of gushing water followed. Story 4. Why are they all grinning like that? As I waiting for the safety practice to end on the open deck with my orange life jacket digging into my neck, that was the first thing that froze in my chest. The passengers' faces weren't tranquil, even if the water behind them rolled steadily and calmly. They didn't look right. I should retreat. I'm 34 years old, a commercial insurance adjuster from St. Louis, and my name is Ethan Price. I wasn't really into cruises. My sister persuaded me to take a 7-day trip to the Caribbean after my divorce last spring, even though I had always mocked them as floating malls for intoxicated honeymooners and seniors. "It will help you think more clearly," she stated. I assumed that she was correct. A week away from the echo of an empty apartment, spreadsheets, and irate clients. It was a fairly typical first day on board. The absurdly large buffet, the faint thrum of the engines vibrating up through the carpet, and the clinking of glasses in the atrium bar. I made an effort to unwind and act as though I wasn't the only one amid the 2,000 people who were laughing and drinking until the sunset. The muster drill followed. Every cruise ship has a rule that when the alarm goes off, passengers must assemble at their designated station, put on life jackets, and wait for crew personnel to perform safety protocols. It wasn't very memorable, but I had done it once previously on a little Bahamas vacation years ago. However, things were different this time. I went down to Deck 7 and followed the crowd to my station. With a rigid face, a crewman in a white suit used a scanner to check my cabin card. People walked into rows around me, their orange vests flashing in the waning light. The air smelled like salt mixed with diesel. I made an effort to get rid of the nagging discomfort. I became aware of them at that point. Perhaps 30 or 40 passengers in an area stood still. Their hands were at their sides, their eyes were straight ahead, and their vests hung precisely even. No chatting like everyone else, no fidgeting, no talking. Then I noticed the smiles, the same. Motionless, tight-lipped, as though painted on. It was a coincidence, I assured myself, perhaps a strange prank from a tour group. However, when I looked back a minute later, they all turned their heads in the same direction, and at the same moment, trailing the crew member as he crossed the deck. To see if anyone else had noticed, I glanced around. An elderly man was adjusting his hat, children were tugging at baggy jackets, and couples were giggling. No one appeared to be bothered. No one but me. I think I heard 30 voices whispering simultaneously as the crew member raised the bullhorn to begin the drill. Loud enough to make my arms stand on end, but too soft to pick up words. I ought to have left at that moment. However, I didn't. I convinced myself that I was dreaming. Convincing myself that everything can be explained is what I do for a living. Ceiling collapses, burning wiring, and cracked foundations. You can always put a purpose on paper. However, as I saw 30 strangers bend their heads in perfect harmony on Deck 7, I was unable to think of one. As if nothing had happened, the drill went on. Using bullhorns, crew members yelled directions while forming lines toward lifeboats and showed how to fasten straps. Parents checked their phones, kids moaned, but those people, those silent ones, didn't move. They never faltered in their smiles. The throng moved once again as the captain's voice, routine and happy, finally came over the PA. Not slowly, simultaneously. Like puppets reacting to a concealed string, their heads snapped up in unison as they turned toward him. A chill of perspiration ran down my back. I snuck out of the crowd as soon as the drill was over. A man wearing a Hawaiian shirt gave me a shoulder pat and grinned as if we had just made it through a dull ordeal together. I was unable to chuckle, though. I had to find out who those individuals were. I observed as the crowd dispersed while hiding behind a lifeboat davit. Couples and families dispersed in the direction of the restaurants and bars, as well as the elevators. The quiet group also split off, but they refrained from going inside. They marched in single file down the deck toward a stairwell designated crew access, which was off limits to passengers. My heart was racing as I hesitated. Compared to common sense, curiosity was more intense. I followed after waiting for the final orange vest to vanish through the door. The stench of oil and sea air filled the stairs. Scratched from carts and boots, the walls were painted an industrial gray. With my hearing strained, I slipped down 2 stairs. The ship's noises faded until the faint hum of the engines was all that was left. I heard it at that point. A humming, low chant. Not in English. I did not recognize any of the languages. Dozens of voices, rhythmically rising and falling. With my heart pounding, I shoved myself against the wall. A strip of pale light spilled out from a damaged door at the bottom. I crept forward, took a quick breath, and took a look inside. In a small storage area, rows of those identical passengers stood shoulder to shoulder. There were plenty of life jackets in nooks. As though reflecting something I couldn't see, their orange vests gave off a subtle glimmer in the dim light. In unison, they swayed while muttering in that empty, lifeless tone. Additionally, a crew member stood facing away from me at the front of the room. The chorus came to a complete halt as he raised both arms high, palms out. My eardrums were crushed against silence. Then all heads turned toward the door as one. In my direction, I staggered back and hit the wall. With a moan, the door swung wider. No one shifted. The similar smiles widened in the gloom as they simply looked. My final typical moment on that cruise was that. My footsteps reverberated too loudly against the metal steps as I dashed up the stairwell. Every breath made my chest hurt, as if I had been racing for miles rather than merely climbing a few flights. The night air slapped me when I exploded back onto deck 7. Couples walked by sipping margaritas. Near the pool, a band played steel drums. As if nothing had happened beneath their feet, normal life had fully restored. I turned around. The door to the stairwell remained open. I thought they would follow me, those beaming faces, that crewman with his arms up. However, there was no one in the doorway. Don't chant. No footsteps. Only a wide rectangle of darkness. I quickly left, attempting to avoid giving the impression that I was running for my life. The remainder of the evening was a haze. I huddled in my cabin with the curtains pulled. I considered calling my sister and unloading everything, but I was at a loss for words. Hey, do you recall the cruise you persuaded me to go on? In an attempt to convince myself that I had dreamed the entire situation, I poured whiskey from the minibar instead. There's a cult under the lifeboats. Then the knock came. Around 2 in the morning, I heard 3 brief knocks on the door of my cabin. Halfway to my lips, I froze. At that hour, no one knocks unless the crew is attending to an emergency. I felt my gut tighten. I put the glass down slowly and moved toward the door. "Hey!" My voice broke. No response. Only the ship's hum and quiet. I unlocked the spy hole. Initially, nobody was present. A moment later, a face leaned into view. One of them. One of the passengers. Grinning. His lips were so strained that they were about to crack, and his teeth were clenched. He didn't flinch. Remained motionless. He was just close enough to make his breath fog the glass. With my heart racing, I staggered back. 3 piercing raps shook the doorframe as the knock returned. My voice trembling, I dialed the front desk. "Someone is outside my room. Someone won't leave." The woman with the phone seemed very composed. "We have noted your concern, sir. Security will check soon. Please stay in your cabin." However, nobody arrived. For hours, I sat on the bed and stared at the door while the lights were on. Finally, fatigue dragged me down. Daylight was coming in through the curtains when I woke up. I stumbled over and wrenched open the door. There was nobody in the hallway. Only the slight scratch of vacuum wheels and the odor of cleaning agents, excluding the life jacket. It was the same orange as the others and was lying nicely folded with the straps fastened right at my entrance. On the collar, there was a small badge that said, "Muster Station 7C, Ethan Price," my name. It wasn't written by me. Furthermore, I had kept my muster station a secret. I recognized I wasn't dreaming at that point. They recognized me. They also asked me to accompany them. I promised myself that I would physically visit the reception counter the following morning. I would insist on answers and make someone listen to me. However, there was a large wait when I arrived, with many people lamenting over misplaced luggage and incorrect invoicing. Clutching the folded life jacket I had discovered outside my door, I stood there perspiring. The young woman behind the counter gave me a courteous grin that avoided making eye contact when it was finally my turn. "Sir, how may I assist you?" The life jacket was placed on the counter. Last night, this was outside my cabin, containing my name. Someone was there and someone knocked. After examining the tag for a while, she pushed it back toward me and said, "All passengers are required to keep their safety equipment in their cabins." I called security and no one came. "Maybe you lost it." "No," I yelled. "I didn't own this. It was left by someone. There's been—" Her smile grew strained. "Please don't raise your voice, sir. Every cabin has a log of its safety equipment. I can have housekeeping provide a substitute if you want." My stomach dropped. She was dismissing me. She didn't want to discuss it, not because she didn't think I was telling the truth. I heard someone cough behind me. Passengers were standing in the lobby when I turned. The same team, the same silence, the same overly broad smiles. Their unwavering gaze was fixed on me. No one else seems to notice. With my heart hammering between my ribs, I walked out of the counter without saying another word. "Attention all passengers. Due to updated regulations, a secondary muster drill will take place tomorrow morning. Please report to your assigned stations at 9 a.m., was the captain's voice that blared over the PA that night. I felt a knot in my stomach. Everything seemed choreographed, as though everything was done for them rather than for safety. I didn't get much sleep. Even so, I made myself depart when morning arrived. I'd rather finish it than hide in my cabin. On deck 7, the crowd reassembled, their orange vests glowing in the sunlight. Instructions were yelled by crew members. Then, the cheerful passengers arrived one by one. They weren't mingled with the crowd this time. They stood shoulder to shoulder in a solid block near the rear of the deck. As the announcements continued, they cocked their heads. A crewman wearing sunglasses halted my attempt to move away. "Stay with your group, sir," he said. "Regulations." Although he spoke in a courteous tone, his hold on my arm was firm. The exercise was over. With a half-hearted clap, the throng started to move away. However, the group of happy travelers remained stationary. They remained rooted, staring at me. They then lifted and put on their life jackets in perfect synchronicity. The buckles clicked simultaneously, sharply, and definitively. Out of their ranks came a voice that sliced through the commotion, deep and resonant, yet not loud. "Ethan Price, Muster Station 7C." I felt a chill run down my spine. My name was as loud as the departure horn, echoing across the deck. Passengers looked about, perplexed, and heads turned. However, I made no sound when I attempted to resist or speak. I had a locked throat. They were familiar with me. I had been marked by them. And they would not allow me to leave. I took some time to return to my cabin. I tried to tell myself that I had dreamed it as I strolled the outer deck while sucking in the salty wind. However, I couldn't get the sound of that voice, my name being called in front of hundreds of people, out of my head. The hallway outside my door was quiet by the time I managed to clamber back inside. I could hardly move the key card since my hands were shaking so much. I froze and pushed in when the lock clicked. On my bed was the life jacket I had brought to the front desk. It had my name boldly printed across it, the straps folded nicely, and the tag facing up. I dropped it as if it were burning. I had a heaving chest. I called security using the cabin phone. I wasn't going to let them ignore me this time. Before a voice picked up, the line rang once, monotonous and flat. I slapped the receiver down and staggered back, vomit rising in my mouth, saying, "Muster Station 7C, Mr. Price." The walls of my cabin felt like they were closing in. I was having trouble breathing. There were no announcements, no atrium music, and no commotion in the hallways that evening. Silence seemed to descend upon the entire ship. Lying completely dressed on top of the sheets and flinching at every noise, I hardly slept. Alarms went off at 3:07 a.m. The emergency signal is a ship-wide klaxon. The hall's lights flashed red. "All passengers, proceed to your muster stations immediately," a voice shouted over the PA. I staggered into the hall with the rest. A few continued to massage their eyes in confusion. Others moved in complete silence. My stomach fell as I got to deck 7. The people were already waiting, all of them smiling and in perfect alignment. The rest of us, regular passengers, huddled close to the crew, scared and confused. The atmosphere was electrified, akin to the pre-storm state. On an elevated platform, the captain emerged, his face white in the intense light and his clothing pressed. He held up a hand. "This is a preventative measure, please don't panic." However, nobody paid attention. The throng moved uneasily. There was a woman crying somewhere behind me, heads snapping toward the regular guests. The joyful passengers turned in unison. Their faces appeared stretched and incorrect as their smiles became wider. Then they started to move forward without saying anything. I pushed through the crowd and retreated. People stumbled and yelled. Crew members attempted to intercept but were frozen in mid-step, as though they were held in place by something. With his hand pallid from the deck lights, one of the smiling men stretched out and touched my sleeve. Then he said, "Ethan Price." He spoke in a low, respectful tone. I broke loose and raced, saying, "You're late." I can't recall how I got past the stairwells and ended myself on a balcony on an upper deck, gazing out at the Black Sea. Long and melancholy, the ship's horn blared once more. Chaos broke out in the muster station below. People on board screamed, but above it all, I could hear that group's coordinated chant, 7C, their voices echoing over the sea. 7C, 7C, then nothing. The deck was empty when I peered down again. They're all gone, the smiling block, the staff, the passengers. All that was left were the orange life jackets, which were strewn around like skins. I can't recall leaving the spacecraft. The remainder of that evening escapes my memory. Days later, I woke up by myself in a motel room, with my own life jacket folded neatly on the chair opposite from me. That's all I remember. My name is still on the tag. And every night at around 3 in the morning, I can still hear the echo in my head, reminding me that I never managed to muster, like the call of the sea itself. Story 6. The sound wasn't just a wake-up call. It was a warning that rang through your chest. At precisely 3:03 a.m., my stateroom phone rang, a metallic screech that sounded louder than it should have amid the ship's silence. I initially believed it to be an error of some kind, possibly a system malfunction. However, I didn't hear a stranger or quiet when I took it up. My voice came to me. It was obvious, the same timbre, the same faint rasp that I had always detested in my own recordings. I dropped the receiver so hard that it bounced against the desk after the person on the other end shouted, "Don't open your cabin door, ever," in just 6 cold, forceful words. My stomach twisted and my hands trembled. All my nerves were burning and I was completely awake. Michael Grant is my name. I'm 34 years old, and I work for a Pittsburgh-based insurance company as a claims adjuster. Dreary existence, dull work. I decided I needed a vacation from looking at spreadsheets, and a quiet apartment that still had a hint of my ex's perfume after a stressful divorce last year. A cruise had been recommended by a coworker. "Dude, it will reset your brain," he added. "Ocean air, buffets, no stress." So in contrast to my typically frugal and cautious demeanor, I made reservations for a week-long Caribbean cruise. I had never even been on a ship before, so I wasn't the cruise kind. However, the beautiful brochure gave the impression that it was a floating metropolis, with neon lights, a limitless supply of food, and contented strangers. It would be therapeutic, I told myself. It was a typical first day. I joined the throng and marveled at the ship's enormous decks and the boundless ocean. On deck 7, I had a small but tidy cabin with a round porthole window that overlooked the ocean. I recall thinking that the constant buzz of the motors was soothing, similar to white noise to block out the memories I no longer wanted to sit with. I basically kept quiet. Before retiring to my cabin at around midnight, I attempted a trivia game in the lounge, ate dinner at the buffet, and strolled along the promenade. Within an hour, I was asleep. Then that call came. There was nothing but static when I eventually ventured to take up the receiver once more. I listened to the slight hiss as if anything could speak again while I sat there with the phone shaking in my palm. In the dark glass, my reflection appeared to be leaning closer, as if it were anticipating my arrival. I made an effort to reason. Was it a practical joke? Perhaps I had imagined the resemblance to my voice because of some crossed wires in the phone lines. However, I knew in my heart that it wasn't an error. It was too deliberate, too exact. That night, I didn't sleep again. It seemed as though someone was waiting just outside the threshold, and every little sound outside my cabin door, the shuffle of feet, the distant clank of a cart, was magnified. My head ached from lack of sleep. By the time the first breakfast announcement was played on the public address system at 7 a.m., I persuaded myself it was behind me the following day. Nothing more than one strange glitch. I made an effort to enjoy the ship. I had a drink by the pool, spent some time in the casino, and even struck up a conversation with a Florida retiree couple who had already been 9 cruises. I laughed harder than I thought I would. It nearly worked for a few hours. However, I observed something strange when I got back to my cabin that evening. My phone's red light was blinking. A voicemail. I hit the button, feeling sick to my stomach. It was a brief message. I froze as I said, "Don't trust the crew," and a flat, urgent voice once more. In some way, my reflection in the porthole window was darker, with unfamiliar eyes peering back at me. And I questioned whether taking this vacation had been a mistake for the first time since I boarded. That message kept coming back to me like a broken record, and I hardly slept the second night. The crew is not to be trusted. It was crazy. Even the crew was unknown to me. They were grinning, serving drinks and directing guests to the buffet. All they were doing was their jobs. However, I couldn't get it out of my body after hearing it in my own voice. I made the decision to test it the following morning. I pretended that I had misplaced my key card and went down to the reception counter. I had seen the young woman behind the desk grin with practice all over the ship. Elena was written on her name tag. "Sure, sir. What is the cabin number?" 712, I answered, keeping a careful eye on her. She paused. It was fleeting, yet it existed. Before typing, her fingers hesitated for a half-second above the keyboard. Additionally, what is the account name? Michael Grant. That brief silence again. She pursed her lips, gave me a short look, and hurriedly gave me a new card. "This is yours. I should have left, but I couldn't help myself. Please keep this one secure." "A strange incident occurred last night," I remarked. The phone in my cabin rang. The corners of her mouth twitched as her smile faltered slightly. Someone was on the line, but it didn't make sense. We occasionally experience technical issues with the internal phones, nothing to be concerned about. Her eyes, however, did not match her words. She had icy eyes. I remained tense for the remainder of the day because of that. I stayed in public spaces and moved between packed lounges and bright decks. The more I observed the crew, the more I became aware of small details I had previously missed. It appeared as though they had been coached to mimic warmth because their grins were practiced and had the same rhythm. Their motions were too coordinated and effective. 2 stewards were folding towels when I passed them, and I thought they both turned their heads at the same time, observing me until I was out of sight. I paced my cabin that night while chain-drinking instant coffee in an attempt to stay awake, but fatigue prevailed. I must have fallen asleep at about 2:30. The phone rang once more at 3 a.m. I was hesitant to respond this time. My throat throbbed with my heart. At last, I raised the receiver. Once more, the voice on the other end was mine, but it was desperate and cracked. With my entire body shaking, I slammed the phone down and said, "Michael, they know you're awake. Stay out of the hallways." I almost stumbled over my own backpack as I stumbled back. I glanced at the door, half expecting it to slam. I heard footsteps outside instead, deliberate, hefty and slow. They came to a halt near my cottage. Then there was a gentle knock. Not desperate, not courteous, simply be patient. With my back against the wall, I tensed every muscle in my body. Whoever knocked didn't come back. They did nothing except stand. I sensed that the room's air was being drawn toward the door. The footsteps continued for what seemed like an age. I spent the remainder of the night awake. My nerves were frazzled by breakfast. To check if I sounded crazy, I made the decision to confide in anybody. I ran across Frank and Marlene, the retired couple I had met earlier, on the pool deck. They were happy, drinking fruity beverages, and they waved at me. They didn't laugh, though, when I informed them about the calls, knocks, and threats. They didn't dismiss it. They simply exchanged glances. Then, with a hammer-like whisper, Frank leaned up close and said, "We got the calls too." I wasn't alone for the first time since this nightmare began, but fear grew stronger in my gut instead of relief. "What? What did you hear it say?" I inquired. Marlene spoke in a weak, nearly tremulous voice. It was the voice of our daughter, Michael. She's been gone for 10 years. However, it was her who called, telling us not to leave our cabin at night. 303, Frank said, each and every evening. Like clockwork, my arms, hair stood on end. Same message, different voices. At the same moment, 2 members of the crew passed our lounge chairs before I could ask them for more. Both had their eyes covered by reflective sunglasses and wore blank expressions. The air changed, but they didn't look at us. I swear I saw Marlene gripping her drink more tightly and Frank looking tense. It wasn't until they were gone that we spoke again. Frank whispered sharply as he drew closer. "Avoid discussing it in front of them. On this ship, sound travels through the walls." I gazed at him. "What are you saying?" Listen, he remarked. "The crew. They're not. Typical. Did you not notice? I had observed. Too often to overlook. I was unable to eat that evening. I waited for the inevitable while pacing my cabin with the lights low. At precisely 3:03, the phone rang once more. I was unwilling to respond. My entire body begged not to pick up. However, I did. The voice wasn't calm this time. It was chaotic, strangled, like talking through water, yet mine. "Michael, they're coming for you. Don't trust the elevators. Take the stairs." I heard the elevator outside my corridor whirling and ding almost instantly. Doors hiss when they slide open. Then there was stillness. With my heart pounding in my ears, I slipped closer to the peephole. I could see 3 crew members standing shoulder to shoulder in front of my door via the fisheye glass, grinning, not moving. Like mannequins awaiting animation, they stood still. Clamping my hand over my lips to prevent myself from gasping out, I staggered back. This time, they didn't knock.